Welcome to Unspoken, a podcast dedicated to exploring the often uncharted territory of trauma and recovery. Here we delve into heartfelt conversations with therapists, survivors, and professionals within the mental health sphere. And together we aim to illuminate the consequences of trauma that are often obscured by silence, stigma, and shame. Today I would like to welcome Elizabeth Hoke, speaker, advocate, educator, clinician, and practice manager of the Liberation Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to accessibility for mental health care. She also works at a ketamine clinic that specializes in addiction recovery and currently teaches continuing education courses and master's level courses at Lewis and Clark College here in Portland, Oregon. Elizabeth is passionate about supporting those in recovery and currently facilitates 2 groups in the Portland area, one of which is psychedelic integration for people in recovery, and the other is Recovery's Remedy, a monthly gathering for addiction supports. We will provide links to these resources as well as to her own recovery story, which was most recently published in the Voices Journal. Elizabeth brings with her a wealth of knowledge and passion that is rooted in lived experience and the science of healing. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, I'm curious about your own history and how it has influenced where you are today professionally. Can you share more about your childhood experiences and how they shaped your perception of self-worth and connection?
Yeah, definitely. So I had a pretty average childhood. I wouldn't say it was overly traumatic or it wasn't that hard. I did have parents who got divorced, and I did have parents who worked a lot and had a lot to do in the families that they moved on with. And, I don't know if it was because of that or if it was just the way I was born, but as far back as I could remember, I've always been really insecure, and I've always had just pretty low self-esteem. And I don't really know where that came from, but that really shaped a lot of my childhood. I always remember looking around, tracking people and trying to figure out who I was based on how people responded to me. And I think I learned that really early, that if I was a good girl, or if I did what I was supposed to do, or if I just made everyone around me happy, then I would be taken care of and loved and felt valuable. And so, yeah, that really colored my life experience as a child, and was really a lot of what led me to early substance abuse, and is what led me into doing what I did before I got into recovery.
It's interesting when we have something that's such a prevalent part of our way of being in the world and we don't know where it comes from. It's kind of hard to reconcile that, especially if it has an influence over our behavior and the way we, end up living our lives as adults. So I can imagine, wondering about that mystery might have been its own thing.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has brought me to, wanting to do this work. The more that I started diving deep into my own therapeutic work, trying to understand where did I start to feel this way, and where did it come from, and understanding my parents and where they came from, and my grandparents and where they came from, and really seeing how things got passed down. It led me to wanting to do this work and helping people also, figure out what makes them tick and what makes them do what they do.
That's lovely. What would you say the turning point was for you when you realized you needed to seek help and make a change in your life?
Yeah. So, my addictive behavior started around 12. And so, I was too young and stupid to really realize what I was doing and to really see it as a problem. I saw that it was fun and it was rebellious, and it was, I was kind of proud of it, proud of my misbehavior and my substance abuse for a long time, until I got into my early 20s. And then I just started realizing that I didn't want to be doing what I was doing, and I felt pretty out of control with it. I was bartending, and I was trying to go to school, and I would be dropping out of school, and I'd be hanging out with people, and I'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I'd end up doing it. And so I was really feeling disconnected from who I was as a person. I was feeling out of control with my behavior, and I started to feel really afraid of myself. Like, I remember just thinking, like, if I can't stop myself, what's going to happen? What's my life going to become? And I really started worrying about my future. And so, I I ended up, somebody that I know had got me to drink some mushroom tea. And the night that we drank mushroom tea, we went out into this park and we were laying in the grass, and I was looking up at the trees, and I just remember having so much love for the trees and the grass and the rain. And I've always been somebody that felt really connected to nature and really connected to animals. That's something that I would give anything and do anything for nature. And I realized in that moment that I was nature. I was like, wait a minute. So I have this body and I am I am nature. Like everything that I love is this thing that I'm also in, and that I could love me too. And it was the first time I realized that like I could actually, I had tried so hard to make other people happy, and I tried so hard to do things to make other people happy. And I realized like I could do that for myself, and I could do that, and I could stop hurting my body and hurting myself the way I was doing. And that was really a big turning point for me.
Well, gosh, that's a really inspiring moment. And what it makes me think about is that a variety of specialists in the field now are talking about substance use as it's a way for us to seek connection to others, or even more so to ourselves. Yeah. And that's kind of what you're saying right now, is it sounds like that's something that you'd been looking for a long time, and you found it in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a long time I was looking for love and connection, but it wasn't happening, and with substance abuse, So when I would go down these holes of drinking too much or doing drugs too much, I would feel more disconnected and more unloved and more out of control and just more disconnected from myself and other people. But there was something about interacting with psychedelics that made me feel more connected and made me all of a sudden realize that I didn't want to hurt myself, which was, it kind of comes back to this idea of right relationship, which I'll get, I think we'll get into in a little bit later. But I had never understood what that meant about being in relationship with myself in a way that really felt caring and loving and nurturing, and being in a relationship with myself in a way that was, the way that I wanted to be in the world.
Which brings me back to something, when you said it in the moment, I felt, a little bit ago, you talked about the 12-year-old you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you talked about her, you said, I was young and stupid. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I felt protective of her in that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you might say to her now.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you might share with that part of you now, given what you know now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would tell her that it's okay. I think that's been a mantra of mine in moments of panic or moments of shame or moments of disgust with my behavior or moments that of regrets. This idea of like, it's okay. Like our mistakes are okay, and doing things that we are embarrassed or don't want other people to know about is okay. Because sometimes, we do things out of pain, or we do things out of lack of relationship with ourselves or lack of relationships with people that love us and support us. And it makes us do things that we regret. But if we ruminate on them, or we decide that who we are is based on those things, then we can never really step out of it. So that idea, and I think that was something that I learned through the experience of working with psychedelics. There was this idea of like, it's okay. It's okay. Like whatever happens, it's okay. And tomorrow's always a new day, and things can always change. And so, yeah, I think if I could contact the 12-year-old, I would give her a hug and just say, it's okay.
Oh, that's really sweet. That's what I wanted to say to her too.
Yeah. Okay, good.
But that also made me think of the way that addiction can influence the perception of who we are, like behaviors that we engage in, or things that we do, or choices we make under the influence of something can end up contributing to the way we shape our view of who we are.
Yeah.
And you were just distinguishing between those things, like, this is behavior here and this is behavior over here, and one is me and one isn't.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a question around that, I guess, but if you had a comment, it's welcome, of course.
Yeah.
It was just something I observed as you were speaking.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it took me a lot to realize, I think part of my therapeutic work helped me see that how I was behaving and what I was doing was not me. I was reacting. I was responding to hurt. I was responding to the longing of connection. I was responding to just really needing connection and needing more than I had. And so that wasn't really who I was. And so learning how to say, oh, that was a part of me, and that part of me still exists. That part of me still behaves in certain ways, and still saying it's okay and finding love for that part has been really healing. And then also finding these other parts of me that are supporting that part.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
Yeah.
You don't have to add that in there. That was just my side comment. You have a unique perspective on addiction recovery, especially regarding plant medicines and psychedelics.
Yeah.
How did you first become interested in these therapies? I know you referenced that initial experience for yourself, but are there other influencing factors as well?
Yeah. So I have a few friends in the community who are also psychedelic therapists. And a few years ago, I met with a friend. My friend, his name's Julio, and he's also a therapist. And him and I had a big conversation about, it's really challenging because if you're in recovery, there's not a lot of room for interacting with any psychedelic. There's this idea that you're powerless over your addiction and you're an addict over everything else, and you can't interact with psychedelics or any kind of drug because that would mean you're relapsed and you're back to square one. So we had a lot of conversations about what does that mean to have something else? And I know there's another psychedelics in recovery group out there that it's called Psychedelics in Recovery. It's they do a lot of really amazing meetings, but part of what you need to be a part of that is to say, okay, I'm also in 12-step recovery. It's they want you in 12-step recovery in order to be a part of that community too. And, for me and my friend Julio, we said, well, we're not part of 12-step recovery. Abstinence is not the model that we're after, so we started thinking about what is it that we're doing differently now that we're not in our addiction. And it came back to that idea of right relationship. And, that term is an indigenous term that talks about interconnectedness and how we are all connected all the time. And can we look at things from a reciprocity type of way, right? So like if I'm going to be using a substance, how am I using that substance? Where did the substance come from? How does it affect me? How does it, in what ways does it serve me? In what ways does it not serve me? And really getting into relationship with it in a specific way. And so the more we talked about that, the more we realized that we needed to create something that supported this discussion. And so that's where those two groups that we created, so one's called Recovery's Remedy, and that's at the Rhizome in Portland here. And the other one's at Portland Psychedelic Society, and it's talks about this idea of right relationship and how can we talk about substance abuse from not just this 12-step model of you're powerless and you will always be an addict, but instead, what does it mean to start to look at all of your relationships, how you're in relationship with yourself, how you're in relationship with substances, how you're in relationship with the earth and your family, and how is that contributing to your addictive behavior? And can we have groups where we talk about that, not just about whether we're using a substance or not?
Interesting. So do you view, the 12-step orientation to recovery as being in opposition to your approach to it?
It's not necessarily in opposition. It just, it didn't work for me. I know a lot of people that 12 steps was really important for them. I can say that it worked for a period of time. So when I had to originally stop abusing substances, which was, most of the days of the week, it was at that point, it was habit and it was my friends and it was my life. It was everything I knew. So for me, 12 steps was important because it helped me find a new community and it helped me create new behaviors and it helped me figure out what a new normal life would look like in the rooms. And so I would say for me, the 12 steps were about the groups and the people and the principles and the principles of you, when you go through the 12 steps, you talk about what you've done wrong and you go back and you say sorry for what you've done wrong and you find ways to forgive yourself. But then on the other side, there's also this, you have to believe in a higher power. You have to, give your power over. And that is, a lot of the, that's a lot of what people really believe in as part of it. And for me, as someone that wasn't a religious person, that was really hard for me. So it's that we do think that 12 steps are really important for some people, and for some people it doesn't work. So we were just trying to find an alternative way of supporting people in recovery who use psychedelics for their spiritual practice instead of going to church or doing 12 steps.
So it sounds like 12 steps are not in opposition to, for you specifically, but maybe insufficient. And that was your experience.
Yeah, for my experience.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you discuss the significance of reconnecting with one's body during the recovery process? And how does this influence healing, would you say?
Yeah. So I think, when going back to the 12-step discussion, when I first was going through the 12 steps, it was like, okay, admit you're powerless and hand everything over to God. And I was like, well, I don't believe in God. So that's good. That's hard right there. I don't know what I believe in. I'm not an atheist. I just don't really know what I believe in. But I also, that was a reflection of my body too. I felt like there's all these people that have this faith and believe in this specific thing, and I don't know what I believe in. And so that really took me outside of myself some more. And I think when we started talking about this idea of right relationship and the fact that I felt like I was nature and the fact that I felt like I was part of this web of life, I started to get more back into my body. And through that, I started realizing that I held a lot of tension from trying to be upright and trying to perform all the time and trying to be the good girl that everybody wanted me to be. And in that, I had a lot of rigidity and a lot of tightness and a lot of pain that I wasn't addressing. And so when I started getting into recovery from this place of relationship, I started figuring out, what is my relationship to my body? How can I get back into my body in a new way? And, I had tried to do yoga before, and I had tried to do meditation, and things like that didn't work when I was in active substance abuse, because I wasn't connected to my body. So people would say, okay, sit. And I'm like, that's not going to work, because I'm going to sit and my brain's going to tell me all these things. And then I'm just going to want to leave the room. But there was something about, in that idea of like, hey, wait, I'm nature. And can I listen to my body from that way? And I had to stop abusing substances to get myself to that place where I could come into a room and I could sit with myself and I could remind myself that I was just this person and that everything was okay. And it did start to repair my relationship with my body.
Which brings to light, like, the importance of timing for any particular intervention, whether it be mindfulness, meditation, yoga, therapy, whatever, you're referencing sort of the way something that works well for lots of people did not work well for you in that moment. And at least as a clinician, I try to consider time and place when I suggest anything for someone. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's so important too, because, I think as therapists, we all know journaling and yoga and meditation is what you do, and then you feel better. But if you're someone that has a lot of really intrusive thoughts and a lot of really shameful behavior that you have a lot of embarrassment around, you don't want to be alone with your thoughts, and you don't want to be alone in journaling and reading all that stuff. And so sometimes there's other things that need to happen before you get to that place.
Yes, absolutely. And you've referenced this a few times now, the importance of right relationship and healing. What does that mean to you, and how do you facilitate this in your practice, would you say?
Yeah, so, when I have people come and they are struggling with addiction or struggling with self-esteem issues or struggling with, a lot of times, usually those are some of the biggest things. I'm dealing with depression, anxiety, self-esteem, addiction, trauma. We go back to what is their relationship with, like, in their life with everything, not just their relationship with a partner or their relationship with their family, but what is their relationship like with their neighbors? What is their relationship like with their coworkers? What is their relationship like with the land they live on? Do they go outside and spend time in nature? We live on this really beautiful planet, and we have so much beauty around us, even if we're in a city, from, the little flowers that grow out of the cracks of the sidewalks to the color of the sunsets and the sunrises to the trees and the blooms in the spring. And are you in relationship with that? Can you see that stuff? And so a lot of times, a lot of my work is trying to bring people back to getting outside of the negative thought patterns, getting outside of the negative beliefs, and seeing the world from that place, and trying to get them outside to be in relationship with things around them to help them find their healing.
Which is part of connectivity and a key ingredient to recovery, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and that leads me to the next question. What role do you believe community plays in the recovery journey, and how do you foster a sense of community within your work?
Yeah. So, I believe community is the medicine. For me, going back to the AA, that was everything. Just it got me to go to the meetings. It really got me to stop drinking. It got me to stop using drugs. It got me to continue showing up over and over. And when people would talk about all the shameful things they'd ever done, it allowed me to forgive myself, to be like, wow, like you can forgive yourself. I think that I can forgive myself for what I've done. And so, we as humans, we have the power to heal each other. We are the medicine for each other. And if we can create spaces where there is acceptance of story and acceptance of mistakes and acceptance of just who you are as a flawed human, because we're all flawed humans and we all do things that we wish we didn't do. If we could just make room to talk about that more, then we can find ways to forgive ourselves, because it's within ourselves that creates the suffering more than anything. It's how we feel about ourselves. It's how we surround ourselves with certain friendships and certain partners and it's the lack of boundaries around people who are not being good to us that comes from us. So if we can come back to relationship with the right kind of community, then we can blossom and grow into this place of being in right relationship with ourselves.
Do you ever feel as though sort of the Western orientation towards community, I would say actually towards individualism, impairs our ability and the buy-in of clients to invest in those around them as part of their healing process?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because even with therapy, we have really gotten pigeonholed into the medical model, right? Therapy has become, okay, what's the person's diagnosis and what are you doing to treat the diagnosis? And if you're not doing those things, then you're not getting reimbursed by insurance companies. So training has become about, okay, how do you diagnose someone and how do you prove that that's the diagnosis and what's the treatment plan? But what about people just having traumatic experiences, being perfect at not having a diagnosis, but actually just being heartbroken or being not having the support they needed to really thrive, and there's not a lot of room for that in our culture, because it's also everyone's kind of signed on to that individualistic thing. So we're all individuals. We're going to take that medication, or we're going to do that silent meditation retreat, or we're going to go to therapy to just talk about ourselves, which just keeps us more isolated into ourselves. So I could say part of what the work I do with the Liberation Institute, it's a community mental health clinic that we don't take government funding or insurance, which means we don't have any money, but we work with volunteer therapists, a lot of times students who are in their program, they're learning how to be therapists, and we're completely sliding scale, which means people can pay whatever they can. And while we have to use the diagnostic words in order to say, okay, if this was the diagnosis, what would the treatment plan be? We don't actually have to give people the diagnosis unless they need it, because we're not getting reimbursed by insurance. And so instead of just focusing on individualized care, we are focusing on groups. So we have alternative groups, like we have dream interpretation groups, and we have meditation groups, or we have yoga groups where people come or we have a singing group. That was like one of my favorite ones. Yeah. And last year we had this Dungeons and Dragons group where people would come and they would play Dungeons and Dragons with one of our therapists, and then afterwards they would all come together to talk about what that was like. So when we get outside of that individualistic medical model, we can start to say, what do people have in common? What's going to make someone feel more connected to someone else? Where is that someone going to get their healing from? That might not be within a diagnostic criteria, but it's actually what someone needs to feel connected to another person.
Yes, and you referenced this in a different way, but are saying the same thing, that our medical model, being pigeonholed into the medical model, forces us to ignore what's right with people and to pathologize normal human experiences in order to get paid for the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It leaves us, that's the option. Yeah. And, I can say, as I've been teaching at Lewis and Clark College, and I feel really grateful to teach there because they do allow us to talk about alternative practices. One of the classes I'm teaching right now is psychedelic integration, or actually it's intro to psychedelics, right? So we're teaching them about the research. There's tons of research. There's lots of universities doing this work right now. And so, one of the things that's happening in Portland specifically is we passed this law, right, Measure 109, that allowed service centers to open. So people are going and they're doing psilocybin. And then they're coming to therapists going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. So we talked to the school and said, we need to have a class where people are getting prepared to do some preparation and integration, because people are doing this work. And so that is something that is really teaching people how to look at alternative practices and integrate different ways of healing in this therapeutic model that we haven't really done anywhere before.
That's really interesting. And I don't know, I don't believe that this is in any of our questions that we've prepared, but I am curious how this niche part of treatment is approaching, like, how do you know when psychedelics are not the right intervention?
Yeah. And that's an important question, because some people see psychedelics as the panacea, right? It's going to fix everything for everyone, and it's always going to work, and that's definitely not the case. What I see is that psychedelics are a catalyst to a deeper process. So really, it's whatever someone's going through is going to make them go through it more. And does someone have the resources to handle that? Does somebody have the community support? Does somebody have what they need in order to get through that? And so, a lot of times with people, if they're like, they come to me and they're like, I'm thinking about doing a psychedelic therapy, or a facilitated session. Some people call it psychedelic therapy, but here in Oregon, a lot of times the facilitators that work at the service centers, they're not allowed to do therapy. So they're just sitting with someone for 6 hours. The person's going through the experience, and it's a non-direct approach. That's how it works. So the therapy really comes in the prep and integration with therapists. So when someone comes in, they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing that. Then I have to ask them, like, what is your healing practice like in your life right now? And it doesn't have to be therapy, but yeah, do you have a community? Do you feel okay with, if you have a bad trip, that you're going to be supported? Or if absolutely nothing happens, like, have you set a lot of expectations on everything changing? So there's so much that needs to be discussed with that.
Interesting. And then I know that this might be us getting into the weeds, so just tell me if it is. But I am curious. I mean, you teach a lot about psilocybin. Mm-hmm. What about ketamine, and how would you decide one over the other?
Yeah, great question. So, ketamine is, it's I see it as like the gateway drug, because a lot of people have never tried a psychedelic, and then they'll go and do ketamine, and then they'll be open to something else. But what I see with ketamine, I work with a physician, and he's an ER doctor, and he, he's able to come and he gives someone the injection, and then after they do their experience, we do some integration, and that's the therapy. So that's what the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is. So with that, it's usually about a 3-hour session. So the minute that the person gets the injection to the end of the actual psychedelic experience is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And by the end of the hour and a half, they're definitely coming back to the room, and they might feel dizzy, or they might feel disoriented, but they're back in their body, and they're not in that other place anymore. Mm-hmm. Whereas with psilocybin, it can be like a 6-hour session. I think for people, once they eat the mushrooms, it takes like an hour to kick in, and then it can be 3 or 4 hours of really in that place. And so that's, time difference is a big thing. But also with ketamine, it's a dissociative and an anesthetic. Mm-hmm. So as someone that's a somatic therapist, I really like working with ketamine, because it allows people to just really sink in and relax. Because, we all have this body armoring that keeps us protected. It's like a scaffolding. So even if we're in a psychedelic experience, we still have our scaffolding on. And that sometimes doesn't allow us to get past our defenses. Sometimes the different medicines can get, the psilocybin or whatever someone's working with can get past those defenses. But ketamine's really good for that, because it just allows the person's body to relax, and then to kind of get under those defenses. So when you start to process whatever's coming up, you're processing it from a relaxed body.
Interesting. So it sounds like you are in support of both interventions, both ketamine and psilocybin.
Yeah.
But for different reasons, or like, Is there somebody that you would recommend ketamine for over psilocybin, or you feel like ketamine just sort of opens the door and is kind of an introductory experience for people who are interested?
It's definitely just dependent on the person.
Yeah.
I've known a lot of people that will go back and forth, and some people are just like, I love ketamine, that's my medicine. I go right to where I need to go with it, and it really helps deepen my process, and it gives me resource, and it makes me, because it allows my body to relax, I'm able to find different parts of myself that step in to help me process more. And then I've had people say, with the same thing with psilocybin, that it was longer, they just needed more time, and everyone has a different reaction though. So sometimes ketamine can make people nauseous. And then on the other side, sometimes psilocybin can make people nauseous. So it really depends on how the person feels in their body. I can say from a legal standpoint, as a therapist, it's still tricky territory here in Oregon, because even though we passed a law where people can sit with psilocybin at a service center, it's still federally illegal. And our board hasn't really said anything. So we haven't, if we're saying, hey, you should go do psilocybin at a service center, we might even be putting ourselves at risk by saying that, a client, if they had a terrible experience, could be like, well, my therapist told me to do it. And so we could be setting ourselves up for getting in trouble since it's federally illegal still. So that's something that's a little bit a gray area at this point, where ketamine, it is, under the supervision of a doctor for the most part. If not, it's prescribed by a doctor. And it's, so a lot of times there's what we've understood from the research there's more research. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You lecture on psychedelic-assisted therapy. What are some common misconceptions about psychedelics that you encounter in your work?
Yeah. So, I think that idea that it's going to fix everything, that once you do a psychedelic, everything, boom, changes. I think people don't realize that it can be really destabilizing. I've told people, if they go do a psychedelic experience and then they come to me for integration, I say, well, make sure, you spend at least 3 months. That's the rule. 3 months before anything big changes. Because I've heard people be like, oh, I left my family and I quit my job and I sold everything and I moved, there's big shakeups that happen. So I'm always working with people to say, okay, slow down and know that it does it. It really, I think Michael Pollan says it in his book, it shakes the snow globe. And so sometimes it feels so good to shake the snow globe, but also when everything settles, we come back into our life, and what do we want that to look like? So while we can use that as a way to change things that felt stuck, we also want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up to change what we want to change and not jump into changing something that maybe we didn't know we wanted to change. We want more time with that.
Interesting, yeah. So we need to make sure that it's clear, that we're looking through clear eyes when we're making choices about our decisions following treatment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
How do you approach the integration process after a client experiences a psychedelic session?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I recommend journaling. If someone's not into journaling, then some kind of practice, even if it's like drawing or art or some kind of practice where they're being with the experience. Because the thing about the psychedelic experience is it doesn't always make sense to our thinking brain. And so sometimes if we're drawing, just free drawing, we can kind of come back to where we were in that experience. Or sometimes if we go back and listen to the playlists, I work with people doing the ketamine therapy, and I will give them playlists a lot of the time. So that way they can go back and listen to it and just kind of sit with it and see if the images came up or the memories come up or things come up. That helps with the integration. Also going back to that idea of community, are you around people who understand what it feels like to have gone through a psychedelic experience? Because it can feel like it shook the snow globe. And for people who don't do that, they're like, what are you talking about? So making sure you're around people who are supportive of things feeling a little different for a few days, a few months. And there's so many great books out there that people can read about this work. One of my favorites I recommend it's called Good Chemistry by Julie Holland, and she was a psychiatrist, and she breaks down a lot of the research, and she talks about some of the stages of what it means to be working with psychedelics and how it changes the body and the brain and what to expect. And that's one of my favorite ones that I tell people about.
Oh, thank you for sharing that resource. Maybe we could put that in the in our notes too, so that people can find that book.
Awesome.
We talked a little bit about this earlier, but in today's individualistic society here in the West, what do you think are the key factors contributing to feelings of disconnection and loneliness that may or may not contribute to substance abuse?
Capitalism. I think that we live in a world, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks a lot about right relationship, and that's really a lot about where I got the idea of right relationship. But she also has a new book called The Serviceberry. I think that's what it's called. And it's about, can we get back into abundant thinking? Because we used to, the idea of capitalism came from a scarcity mindset. And her book asks, can we see, instead of seeing everything from this lens of scarcity, can we see it from abundance? She talks a lot about the gift economy and what it means to be in a place of giving, in reciprocity. So not just, I'm going to charge a fee, you're going to give me that for what I gave you, and just not, taking away transaction and bringing back this idea of gift giving. Because when we're giving the gift, there's something in it for the person that's giving. So when we come back to the idea of reciprocity, it's not just a one-way exchange as much as it is there's something for both people. And so her book challenges, us to say, okay, can we transform capitalism into something that looks a little different? Like, we understand we all need parts of capitalism. There's things that are working here, but our individualistic culture comes from this idea that there's a lot of scarcity, and we have to do what we have to do to take care of ourselves. And if we don't, then we're not going to survive. And that mindset keeps us disconnected from people. And that mindset keeps us in addictive patterns and in isolated behaviors and in, relationships that don't always feel nourishing. And so, yeah.
This is obviously like a philosophical discussion, when you start getting into capitalism and things like that. I do think about these things a lot, especially when you travel to other places,
Yeah.
And one of the first things that came to my mind when you were talking was one of the books that I used to read to my children, which was about, I cannot remember the name of it right now, and I just loved it so much. I still have it, actually, where the main character of the book, it was his birthday, and as part of tradition, he gave gifts to others, to those around him, versus the way we do it, And my children, of course, were like, excuse me.
No, Mom.
I don't think so. And I'm thinking, well, maybe yes, actually. That's the way we approach it, because the gifts in our lives are typically the people in our lives. So there's some recognition in that, but also traveling to other places where, there may not be as much emphasis on protecting free speech. Like somebody said once when I was in Rwanda that, well, if we say whatever we want and we have the freedom to do so, but the result is the killing of our friends and neighbors, how good is that for us ultimately?
Yeah.
So, finding balance between, scarcity, abundance, connection, and loneliness, and all of those things is hard to wade through in this point in time, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's a good question, and how do we stay in conversation with this question? Because that's what we need to do, right?
Yeah.
I think there's so many times people say, oh, it's just the way it is. But if it's not working.
That's one of the things that makes me so upset if somebody ever says that to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be the way it is.
Yeah. So what do we have to do? And sometimes we don't know what we have to do. So going back to that first concept of like, it's okay. And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah,
and
approaching it with curiosity.
Yes.
Instead of defensiveness or whatever.
Yeah. And community and
Absolutely.
Believing in each other and saying, what are you getting that's working? What are you not getting that's not working? And how do we fix that together as a community?
Absolutely. Yes. So how then, this kind of leans into, it leans into what we're just talking about, kind of, but how do you think our societal views on addiction and recovery, how can we shift them to be more compassionate and understanding? I mean, there are a lot of narratives around addiction and people who are trapped in it that...
Yeah, it's interesting because it depends on what lens you look at addiction through. Some people believe it's a moral issue, like you have to just... you just don't want to stop, so you're not stopping. You don't have that, you just can't. You don't have that willpower. You don't have the willpower, right? Or there's a book called Broken Brain. And her name's Mia. I can't remember her last name, but she talks about it as a learning disorder, that if people start using substances early enough, then it becomes like a path in the brain that is a learning. It becomes
like
learning.
state-based learning.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. So she looks at addiction through that. And then if we look at Gabor Mate's book, who wrote Rama the Hungry Ghost, he sees it as a systemic issue, right? It's like he sees that we're all micros of the macro. And when we see people with addiction, we're seeing people who are really expressing what's happening on the whole, and it's coming through them. And so, yeah, it really depends on how we're going to look at it. And another thing, I think that was really helpful. There's an author named Johann Hari who does a TED Talk, and he says the opposite of addiction isn't abstinence, it's connection. Mm-hmm. And so if we start to look at, we need people who are addicted to have more connection. And there's another book that says addiction as an attachment disorder, and it's like it's a big textbook that they use in class. But looking at it from that perspective too, like, yeah, is addiction an attachment disorder, then is it something that should be punished? Is it something that should be, you just have to be sober? Or can we look at treating it differently if we start looking at it through those different lenses?
Perhaps it's easier to blame those that are suffering than to help them. Yeah. I don't know if that's why that's kind of the knee-jerk response that we have to addiction or other forms of if somebody is assaulted or is a crime victim or something, we tend to, what were you doing wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, well, it won't happen to me. It kind of makes people feel like, oh, it's not going to happen to me because I didn't choose that. Or, it allows people to just kind of step over the drunk homeless person on the street and be like, well, that's not my problem. They did that themselves. But it's like, yeah, but if we did look at it as, wow, this person has a lot of trauma, I'm guessing, and has had a lot of attachment stuff, I'm guessing, and maybe has a learning disorder of creating this need for substance relief. If we start looking at it through all these ways, can we have more compassion for the people around us? Like, will that encourage us to do it differently as a community if we start to look at addiction in different ways? If we start to be in relationship with everyone around us who has the addiction and not, no, that's you, I'm not in relationship with you, and that's not my fault, I don't need to deal with that.
That's true. And then there are other complexities like, the way addiction can affect family systems, and how do people navigate those sort of, gray areas when we want to help our loved ones and they're not ready for a change. There are these other layers too to address. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's the rule in families that have addiction of like, don't ask, don't talk about it, don't tell anybody. Mm. And that goes back to the lack of relationship, right? If we don't have the kind of relationship in our family system where we can talk to each other or talk to other people, that fuels that addiction. And it's not even just the person that's suffering from the addiction, but it's everyone in the family. Mm. And, it's really tricky because in part of the groups that I run with Julio, there's a lot of people that come to our groups that actually don't have substance abuse issues, but they have addiction issues. So whether that's gambling or sex or, eating disorder, or there's like different ways where the addiction is showing up and manifesting. And a lot of them have those same family rules of like, I grew up in a family, there was a lot of secrecy, there was a lot of don't ask, don't tell, there was a lot of keep yourself isolated, there's a lot of shame, and there's a lot of stay away from the truth of what's actually happening because we don't want anyone to see what's actually going on. And so we sit together and we all say, okay, well, mine was alcohol and yours was gambling and yours is masturbation and yours is eating disorder. But like, we all have these common threads of secrecy and loneliness and isolation and that happening in a lot in family systems and then in our greater culture and society.
And it just takes so much effort to put our finger in the dam and keep it all behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Mm. What advice would you give to someone who feels hopeless in their struggle with addiction or substance use?
I would say, you're not alone, and know that there's a lot of people out there that struggle. Part of why I shared my story was for that reason, because, I think when I was really young and started, behaving the way I was, I felt really alone, but I didn't care. And then when I started caring that I was alone, and like I just needed people to reach out and people to tell me about what they were doing. And it wasn't happening until I started, really finding people in recovery and finding people who were able to share that we all have shameful things. We all have things we're embarrassed about. We all have things we wish we didn't do or say, or wish we can turn back the clock and change. Like everybody has that. And the more that we tell our story and the more that we forgive ourselves, the more that we heal together as a community. And so, yeah, just it's okay, and find your people that you can feel safe enough to share your story with, because everyone's got stories to share, and it's medicine that we share stories with each other. Like that becomes the medicine.
It seems like thematically your message is that healing occurs in the collective.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So looking back at your journey, what are you most grateful for, and how has your understanding of happiness evolved over time?
Yeah, so I feel really grateful for the mushrooms. I feel like psilocybin has helped me come into relationship with myself in a way that I don't know if I could have done. I feel really grateful for friends and for community and for, just for people that had always been okay with sharing their story. I don't know if I would be here sharing my story if I didn't hear all the stories that came before me. And so, just grateful for that collective healing and for the fact that that's how it works. Because it feels easier to isolate, and it feels easier to not depend on people, and it feels easier to just go home and lock the door and not be in relationship, but it doesn't feel good. And so I feel grateful for the hard work of relationship and community.
So then what would you say in terms of community and relationship, what are the resources or practices you recommend for those who are interested in exploring plant medicine or psychedelic therapies, or any other recommendations that you might have?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've never done psychedelics before, ketamine's a good start, and it's legal, and you can do it with a therapist. If you're here in Oregon, you can do psilocybin. It's at a service center, but it is federally still illegal, so it's a little tricky. So just want to do some more research about that. We have a Portland Psychedelic Society that has really amazing groups and workshops and a huge community of people. That's one of the recovery group. The recovery group that I do is on Fridays at Tabor Space at 5:15. It's part of Portland Psychedelic Society. So they're a really beautiful community of people who have come together and provided this community resource. And same with the Rhizome. The Rhizome is another community that I'm a part of that is all about education to the people around psychedelics and bringing people together to talk about these things. So
beautiful. Thank you so much. So I don't have any other questions, but I wanted to see if there's anything that remains unspoken that you'd like to speak for.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Okay.
Just grateful that you gave me a place to speak, and thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and for sharing your information with our audience. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.